Chapter 16. Fears of the Dark. Well, Sombra was right about one thing at least. Studying was definitely the distraction that Twilight had so desperately needed. The investigation after her talk with Luna had been less than enlightening. The sum of all that she had learned was that no pony else had learned anything at all. There were no leads, no suspects, barely a scrap of evidence to go off of. At least, no evidence that they had yet found. All that was truly known was that the perpetrator was a unicorn dark mage who may have been someone who had access to, or at least detailed knowledge of the castle and its guard rotation. Of course, even the latter piece of information was only speculation. There was no reason to think that he had simply used a dark magic spell yet known to them to gain access without being seen. After all, if the likes of Nightmare Moon or King Sombra would be capable of that, why not this new threat? And therein lied the problem. Speculation. Way too much of it. There were too few facts, no true certainty, and that left the trail cold and dead on arrival. It was frustrating to every pony involved. A solution was required, but Twilight had yet to form any ideas as to how they could achieve it. Even Sombra himself had provided sadly little insight on the matter, only knowing as much as Twilight herself was able to ascertain. So, at least for the time being, the dark mage remained concealed in the shadows. For the time being. Still, it did provide Twilight and Sombra ample opportunity to return to the princess's room and go over what the former king of the Crystal Empire had taught the mare before they were whisked away by this new mystery. And ample time for Twilight to pick back up where she'd left off and continue trying to make use of Sombra's fear spell. And, rather than a scroll, the target for enchantment was now a quaint little hoof mirror, recovered from the nearby dressing table. And with each passing moment, each attempt, she got a little bit closer to completing the sinister spell, though she had not yet succeeded. As before, Twilight's horn fizzled out, and the mirror sat on the table in the same idle position it had been in for the past couple of hours. She gave off a huff and a noise of disappointment at the latest failure, but wasted no time in mentally and physically preparing herself for another attempt.
Focus, Sombra urged. Remember, the intent is key. You must want the object to suffer your wrath, be beholden to its inner demons. Unleash your strength without hesitation, and all will bow to your indomitable will.
As you've been saying for hours now,
Twilight deadpanned.
Still hard to do on a mirror. I don't hate myself that much, you know.
It would have made this lesson far simpler,
Sombra said in what Twilight hoped was an attempted humor.
But as it is, all preconceptions must be conquered, all hesitation denied. You are faced with an obstacle to your ascension, even if it is a simple mirror. Would you truly let such a trifling trinket stop you now?
Twilight gave a low growl of frustration, focusing her eyes back on the mirror as dark magic started to flow from her eyes, and her horn lit up with the sickly hue of dark magic. She started to focus on forming the spell, forming the necessary matrices, and she started to let her negative emotions build up inside her to power the spell. The energies bubbled and crackled as it built up along the surface of her horn, the alicorn's eyes narrowing as she started to focus back onto the mirror. And yet still the connection just wasn't forming. This was ridiculous. She was better than this. She could learn any spell she set her mind to. Magic was such a huge part of her life. She would not let this thing stop her. On that, Sombra had been completely right. This stupid and insignificant thing thought it could get in the way of academic progress? No, it would not. She wouldn't let it. It would not stop her. It wouldn't! There was suddenly an almighty gust that blew through the room and dislodged anything not nailed down as a beam of pure dark energy shot out from Twilight's horn and impacted the mirror. The dark magic in her eyes deepened as her red slit-like pupils narrowed spitefully. The mirror almost seemed to come alive, writhing in sheer agony as the crackles of dark magic assaulted the object and dug their way inside of it any way they could. The surface started to splinter, the mirror cracking as the stress became too much. And then it stopped. The dark magical stream ceased, the mirror popping back together like nothing had happened, as the last vestiges of the spell gave their last pops, before retreating inside its frame. Twilight, panting heavily from the exertion, couldn't help but feel her lips slowly crack into a humongous smile. She had done it! She'd completed the spell! Take that, mirror! Science wins! Sombra noted the extreme amount of pride Twilight was feeling in herself at that moment, the sheer elation of having conquered yet another magical spell. He gave an amused, if slightly sinister, chuckle at the sight.
Very good, granddaughter. It appears you have yet another triumph to your name, as it was expected.
Well, there's nothing like magic studies to get the blood pumping,
Twilight said, giving a nerdy little snort that she followed up with a small blush and a giggle.
Sorry, but this is just so exciting! I live for magic!
As I have long noted, he responded. Now you have proven just how far your prowess extends. Your capabilities are worthy of the most advanced of my spells, just as I had hoped. Yes, I can teach you all I have to offer.
Great! Where do we start?
Patience. There shall be plenty of time to learn all that I have to give. For now, let us continue along with your elation and further your mastery of fear itself.
Oh, there's more to the spell?
Recall, my descendant, the other use of the spell, beyond a simple enchantment on household objects.
Suddenly, Twilight felt her bad mood start to return.
Please tell me you're not suggesting that again.
To cast upon a living being is quite simple now that you have achieved it upon an inanimate object,
Sombra confirmed with a fang-filled smirk.
I am certain there are plenty of individuals deserving of such punishment in this wretched city. Oh, I can see a few right now, festering within the pits of your memories. This blue blood would be a valid target, yes?
No!
Twilight protested.
There are plenty of jerks in the castle, but look who's talking, Sombra. They don't deserve that. No pony does.
Sombra rolled his eyes.
It is ultimately harmless and not so dangerous. They need not know what happened. It could be but a simple nightmare they experienced during their sleep, or their memories could be clouded by their fear, for that is the beauty of it. Fear is an eternal tool, and with it, any of these entitled fools will serve our lineage until their dying breaths, so not to experience it again.
I'm not doing that. No fear slaves, at all.
But think of how things could improve. You could make the selfish become selfless, the greedy give all their possessions to charity. Their terror will make them slaves to your will, with which you could improve the lives of those they would sooner ignore.
No! It's still wrong. You can't just mess with a pony's head like that. The moral implications are so messed up and... what if their will was too strong?
They need not recall the encounter should they prove too powerful a mind. No, there are more direct methods for individuals of such caliber.
Sombra, stop! I'm not talking about this!
Twilight shouted, her blood starting to boil and her patience wearing thin.
I don't care what I could use it for, it's still wrong! A pony's mind is private! It's not happening!
Sombra's face curled into a deep frown.
Do not let moral sentiments blind you to your potential, Twilight Sparkle. We are beyond the grips of what is right. We do as we will.
That's not how this works!
We are above the petty lives of the common pony. Even those so-called nobles are but ants in a giant's playground. They are ours to command. It is our legacy.
Your legacy! You really are a monster, you know that?
You seek to learn from me. You are my very own blood,
Sombra growled.
Yet you still slave yourself to the false teachings of Celestia.
Don't mention her!
Her plaything, her puppet, a tool, weapon, piece of a perverse game of chess. Celestia's
fine! You want me to test my strength on a jerk? Then I
Twilight bellowed, a wave of magical energy cascading around her as she turned on Sombra, her emotions finally bursting from all of the stress she'd been under since his arrival. The whole world became a blur, all except for the flinching phantom who was the blame. Sombra. Twilight's dark magic seemed to shift and mutate, the darkness increasing while the sickly green highlights shifted hue until they were more of a ghostly blue. Both the magic coalescing around her horn and streaming from her eyes underwent this shift, the slits that were her pupils going from a deep red to a darkened lavender. Sombra, on his part, met his descendant's gaze. His eyes narrowed as his mind raced, analyzing this unexpected outcome. This darkness was new, feeling and looking different to the type he was used to. It felt powerful, hungry, and it was searching for him. He didn't have anywhere to go, attached to the mirror as he was, and his strength, still recovering, was insufficient against the wave of magic heading towards him. There was nothing he could do as it consumed him. The last thing he saw being Twilight's eyes returning to their natural state as she seemed to realize with great horror what she had done. Then she too entered the darkness. The Crystal Empire. Twilight examined her surroundings, her body and mind feeling numb with shock as she tried to process the last few moments. She'd been in her room with Sombra, studying that spell, and then...
Oh, Celestia.
Twilight muttered.
Sombra? Where are you? Are you okay? I didn't mean to...
The king was nowhere to be found. For that matter, why was she in the Crystal Empire? And why was it daytime now? Radiant, wait up! The sound of a cult's voice caused Twilight to twitch, and she started looking around to locate the source. And while it wasn't immediately apparent as to who had spoken, in quick succession a small pony came scuttling around the corner in a fit of giggles. A filly, one who seemed to enjoy being pursued by... Twilight's eyes widened, her horror increasing as she began to put the pieces together. The colt was a gray unicorn with bright green eyes and a deep dark mane. He had yet to gain his cutie mark, and he looked so... innocent. But Twilight recognized him all the same. Sombra. So young.
I'm in his mind.
Twilight realized with a wave of guilt.
Did I use the fear spell? What am I? No, I don't want to be here. I shouldn't be here. How do I...
Twilight tried lighting her horn, but nothing seemed to happen. The foals didn't even notice her as they passed right on by, and upon examining a hoof, she did note an almost ethereal quality to it.
Oh no. I don't know how to stop this. Oh, why didn't I ask him about that earlier?
The two foals stopped a short distance ahead, Twilight's gaze returning to them. A new curiosity came to her mind, though it was heavily outweighed by the guilt. She hadn't meant to lash out, but she'd just gotten so angry at him for what he was suggesting. Now Twilight just wanted to stop this in any way she could, but with her current knowledge, that didn't appear to be possible. Her guilt increasing even further, the Alicorn realized she had no choice but to watch and discover just what it was the Master of Fear himself had to be scared of.
You're such a slowpoke,
the filly teased. Sombra huffed.
No, I'm not. You're just super duper fast. Oh yeah, I'll be the fastest filly in the Crystal Empire, or my name isn't Radiant Hope.
You wanted to be a princess last week. She puffed up her cheeks with a blush.
Well, that would be nice. But you know I really want to be a doctor.
Blech. Sombra faked a gag.
That means I'll be working with yucky leeches and stuff.
Twilight snorted. She'd forgotten that this was 1,000 years in the past.
I'll just use magic. That's what we have this for.
Radiant replied, pointing at her horn.
Quinnamore's really good with it. I need to be as well.
Sombra seemed to slump, kicking a crystal fragment idly.
Huh? What's wrong? It's fine for you. Every pony likes you,
Sombra muttered.
I'm just the orphan freak.
Radiant Hope took on a safe expression.
Oh, come on. You're not a freak.
Yeah, he is, a new voice bellowed, and Twilight turned to see a small gathering of about 6 crystal pony cults come wandering up. They all lacked horns. Earth ponies. So stop bothering her, Hornhead. Sombra seemed to slink back timidly, though Radiant stamped a hoof indignantly.
Hey, I'm a unicorn too.
Yeah, but you're pretty, like the queen and the princess, the cult replied, causing Twilight to roll her eyes and Radiant to blush awkwardly. He's just a loser. Can't even do magic that well.
And he's not at all colorful like the rest of us,
another cult added in as all the others cheered in a jeering agreement. All but one, a little purple colt who seemed to be younger than the others. He looked rather like he didn't want to be there, not joining in while the others taunted the future Dark Mage. Wait, was that Crystal Shield?
Maybe we should go,
the memory of the young Crystal Shield quietly muttered, unheard by the other cults. The ringleader scoffed, trotting up and standing domineeringly over the cowering Sombra.
Think you're so tough 'cause you got a horn, do ya?
He taunted, Sombra shrinking down further while not responding.
Not talking? Answer me!
Still nothing.
This is why your parents didn't love you,
he shouted before he then turned around in a huff and bucked out while Twilight watched helplessly. Radiant gave a yelp as Sombra was hit square in the face, the colt almost doing a backflip as he was kicked backwards and landed hard on the crystalline road. Radiant tried to rush towards him, but the ringleader stepped out in front of her and blocked her path.
Yeah, you don't want to hang out with him, but we're better off with some pony else,
the cult dismissed, his gathering of cults all surrounding Radiant and trying to lead her away from Sombra as if to protect her.
Hey! Stop that! He needs help!
Radiant begged, trying to push past the group of far stronger cults.
I'll tell on you! Sombra! Let me help him!
The mob forced Radiant away from Sombra, the colt now curled into the fetal position as sobs racked his body. Crystal Shield was the last to walk, looking like he was about to approach Sombra before one of the other cults sharply barked his name and frightened him into submission. With a heavy heart, he left the bleeding foal behind and rejoined his so-called friends. The world started to fade, the laughs of the foals and shining crystal architecture growing distant before vanishing altogether. By the end, all that was left was a sobbing cult and a distant, frozen, opaque visage of Radiant Hope, desperately trying to push her way back to her stricken friend. Slowly, shocked at the level of bullying that had just been put on display, Twilight started to approach the cult. He was curled up as tightly as he could make himself, his muzzle pouring with blood as tears flooded down his cheeks. So, this was what the King of Shadows feared. A childhood of abandonment, a cult left unwanted by the world with only a single spark of light in the form of Radiant Hope. A spark that was forced away, leaving a young child feeling so alone. Twilight glanced towards Radiant, the future mother of Sombra's son, another of Twilight's ancestors. What had she thought of him by the end? The stallion who had been born from a world where he believed friendship a lie, where you had to forcibly take everything you wanted. Despite it all, a bit of resolve returned to Twilight's heart. It confirmed what she had already believed, that there was something yet redeemable deep down in Sombra's soul. A small foal who so desperately wanted some pony to hold him tight and tell him everything would be okay. And then Radiant started to shift, a new form taking its place. Another stallion, so like Sombra, and yet... was it the son he never knew? But the changes didn't stop there. And Twilight watched as new images started to play before her eye. And as she did so, the sobs of the cult only seemed to grow more despairing. Twilight fell onto her rump, her eyes unable to be torn away from what she was witnessing.
Oh, Sombra.
And then, with his greatest fear of all now known to Twilight, the spell had run its course. When Twilight awoke, she was on the ground. Her head hurt, feeling like 1,000 molten needles had been forced into her skull, slowly and painfully. She let out a small growl as she tried to plant her hooves under her, panting heavily as an influx of emotions racked her being. And then, upon looking up, she found Sombra looking down at her with a conflicted expression.
"So," he began in a low growl, "it appears you have completed the lesson after all."
Sombra,
Twilight stopped as she got up, her mouth gaping as she tried to think of some way to apologize for the monstrosity of her actions.
"I am impressed," he said sincerely. "Offended, but impressed. Your display of power was intriguing. Yes, your potential is far greater than I had ever hoped."
Twilight was silent, averting her gaze. Sombra's eyes hardened.
"But I know what you saw. It was not for your eyes, or that of any pony but myself. This desecration is one I cannot forget."
I didn't mean to hurt you.
Twilight whispered sadly and with great shame. She sniffled, and Sombra suddenly found surprise within himself as he felt some of his spite drain away at the sight of her sadness. His frown faded, suddenly finding himself assaulted by emotions he had no desire to experience. But experience them he did, the Dark Mage inwardly cursing his traitorous heart. Something he had thought himself beyond, and yet was now reignited at the sight of this mare's first volunteer. Sombra sighed.
I know. Perhaps our lesson should be placed on hold for the time being."
Twilight gasped.
No, I mean, I don't want to stop. I don't want to use them on any pony either, not like that. Not even to ponies like Blue Blood or Trixie, but this... I want to continue. This is my legacy, right?
A small fragment of what might be considered pride lit up within Sombra.
"Indeed, it is. Very well. I shall refrain from bringing us to live experimentation for the moment. But you must one day recognize our place in this world, Twilight. You saw the lie that is friendship and other of Celestia's methods of control. Mine are just less bathed in deception and more transparent in what they are."
That's not true.
Twilight said with a shake of her head.
What you need is a friend. I don't know what to think about the princess, but everything I know about friendship came from what I have seen personally. I can show you that too, that there is a better way.
Sombra shook his head.
"There is no better way. The only way to protect those you love is through total control."
Is that why you did what you did? It was the only way you and Radiant could be together, even if she didn't want it to be so?
Twilight asked carefully.
Even if you weren't the cult she'd known anymore?
Sombra turned away, closing his eyes.
"You will see, granddaughter. The security of our line is all that I care about. But you hold a great many more things close to your heart. One day you must be prepared to cast them aside. or else be prepared to do what you must in order to safeguard them forever.
We give each other that. I don't need dark magic for it.
We shall see.
And with that, Sombra faded away. Twilight stared at the empty spot with a look of sadness, thinking upon the very nature of the stallion as she now understood it. The greatest tragedy of all was that, despite prior beliefs, his conquest had never been about power, not really. No, the truth was far more terrifying. It had been about love. For both a mare who no longer knew him and for a son he had never gotten to know. And now, just maybe, for a distant granddaughter he had discovered so many years later. Corrupted love. No wonder the Crystal Heart despised his very being. But even more terrifying, a small part of Twilight, a deep, dark, niggling voice from the deepest depths of her subconscious, was wondering whether or not he was right. To sacrifice the needs and rights of so many in order to ensure that those you loved were able to go on in a world that could never hurt them. A world where she saw and ruled all. A world to morph as the Alicorn saw fit. No, she had to shut out that voice. It was wrong. Like Radiant, they never would care for such a world. A world devoid of color and joy. Even for the security such a reality would bring. It wasn't worth it. Creating such a world out of love would destroy the very spirit of that love, leaving nothing but a cold, hard shell where no pony was truly happy. Twilight believed that to be the truth wholeheartedly. She had to. The princess glanced at the nearby mirror, remaining right where she had left it after completing the spell. Picking it up, Twilight stared right into her own reflection. The face that stared back seemed, on the surface at least, to be as it ever was. And yet a cold shiver made its way down Twilight's spine, a sense of unease filling her as she saw her own inner conflict in the newfound bags beneath her eyes, recalling the strength she had felt when attacking Sombra as she had. Her grip on the object tightened. If the wrong magical signature were to touch it, like some poor unsuspecting maid, then they would be forced to live out their worst nightmares. Twilight took a deeper hold of the mirror and, in a flash of her usual magic, rendered it to ash. Gone was the foul trap of her own regretful creation, and so too was the reflection caught in the glass. It was probably for the best.